Oh, hello there. Welcome to Catalyst Energies. My name is Dee. Thank you for joining me. I'm so grateful that you are here. Welcome to this full moon forecast and total lunar eclipse transmission. We're going to go over the main astrological themes of the next 2 weeks from full moon to our next new moon, which I do believe is on the 18th of March. Go into some more general trends and themes about this eclipse season, maybe do a little retrospective about what's transpired since the solar eclipse and how it has connected to things astrologically. Maybe share a little bit about some of the space weather and solar activity, the Schumann resonance. I'm going to point out a video that you may want to just listen to. And certainly I can give you the Cliff Notes version if you're not interested. It's just, it's good to share resources so that you can get multiple perspectives on something that is happening, including your own perspective, right? Your own intuitive perspective, your own actual empirical observation. These are all really important, and they will continue to be important as we move forward. So welcome back, everyone. Thank you for being here. I really do appreciate all of you so much. So how's everybody doing? I started my morning. Well, before I get into my dream, which I felt like was more than a dream, I started my morning with acupuncture. So I'm very settled and grounded. And in fact, that is exactly what we've been working on over the last few sessions is groundedness and centering, especially that stomach spleen set of channels. So I am, like I said, feeling very grounded right now. And I would encourage others, maybe not necessarily that particular modality, maybe that particular energy system is not what you need to focus on, but I would recommend, especially as we move through the next 2 weeks and the months ahead leading up to the summer, that whatever practices that you have employed, that you're currently committed to in order to bring you to that grounded state, whatever it is, right? If you create art, if it's about being out in nature, if you have a meditation or a energy work practice, right? Tai Chi, Qigong, if you practice yoga, if you practice meditation, whatever your self-healing is, whether you work in tandem with someone to do healing work, right? Like an acupuncturist, a Reiki master or practitioner, a massage therapist even. Whatever it is, I will continue to encourage all of us to maintain that or continue that or to seek that out because being grounded, staying grounded, getting that nervous system comfortable with the increase in frequency that continues is really important, especially as we move forward. So I love starting my day actually with those types of things. Acupuncture first thing in the morning. I will get my massage first thing in the morning as well. It really just sets the tone for the rest of the day. And miraculously, my schedule at the office just naturally balanced out so that I could do this transmission without feeling rushed, which is what would have happened if I tried to do it yesterday. So yes, we're a little late, but we are still in the full moon phase for the next day and a half. So everything that comes through with this forecast and this transmission will still be relevant. In fact, it'll be something that will be you'll be coming back to in the days ahead and in the weeks ahead, because the full moon, when we have clarity of purpose, when we have illumination and fulfillment, then the real work starts, right? So the beginning of a lunar cycle from new moon to full moon is we set intentions and then we start responding and reacting to all of the things that start coming up to the surface from that intention, right? The seed has been planted and it starts to germinate and come up and poke itself through the soil. And we respond to things. We learn where there may be obstacles. Maybe we're a little proactive about those things. But when the full moon happens, we have full illumination. And then it is our responsibility with that conscious awareness to implement things as the light of the moon wanes, right? So we have less of that sustainment emotionally from the light of the moon. which is really just the solar energy reflecting back to us in a different way. We still have to maintain and, like I said, fulfill that purpose even without the sustainment of the solar energy in our inner landscape, which is what the moon represents. So regardless, everything we're going to talk about here today in this video is going to be something that we come back to, each of us in our own way, over the next days and weeks ahead. So it's not like we've missed our chance because the eclipse already happened, which it did, right? If I had attempted to do this yesterday, it would have been completely rushed and wouldn't have the benefit of the dream that I had last night, which really summed up a lot of what I was picking up on and kind of coming to about this full moon lunar eclipse moving forward. So just know that everything that's going to be brought forward here is something that you can take with you and come back to over the days and weeks ahead. So one thing to consider too, because it is eclipses, is that oh boy, so it looks like somebody might have wiped out down the road from my house. We were supposed to get snow that then turned into sleet, that then turned into freezing rain, or just rain. And it's just been rain all morning, but it's also been a little bit under freezing. So I have I don't know what's going on around my property. But there seems to be some sort of like power spot here that really is can be quite destructive. People wipe out on this road all the time. Now, of course, if it's wet, it's even worse. And lightning will strike right in the same spot normally where people will wipe out, just because. And I mean, there's so much more about this property and this land in particular that I could go into, but I just got distracted because I can see from my window what's going on down at the curve, right, where there's no sun that shines and it's probably still icy, and somebody decided they were going to haul ass around that corner and wipe out into the guardrail again. So anyway, I wish I had a curtain so I wasn't so distracted. Anyway, but that also kind of feeds into what I'm going to talk about with this dream, because there is something profoundly powerful about this land right where I'm at. I don't think it's an accident that we ended up here. There they go. Ended up here, and we've been stewarding this land and really doing grid work on this land in particular for the years that we've been here. So last night, I did not get up and look at the eclipse. It was probably overcast anyway, based on what is happening right now. So, but I was up pretty early, about 4:30 or so. But what I was experiencing at the time of the eclipse, roughly, was a very almost lucid dream, which is not unusual for me. But it was right here on this property. And in the dream, I am surrounded by massive trees on this property. And in the dream, a massive tree on this property came swinging down, right, just fell over and was parallel to my house, like right next to it, but nothing was damaged, right? Because in the dream, I'm like, whoa, this huge tree just fell. And I remember going around my house and my property, like making sure, did anything get smashed? Did this tree like fall into part of our house? Is our porch still intact? Like all of the things. Nothing was damaged, but this massive, massive tree fell over right next to the house. And the last time, so that in itself is something we're going to expand on here. And yes, that in particular is relevant to me personally based on how this eclipse has aspected my chart, which is not necessarily, it doesn't need to be shared here. However, just the imagery of this massive tree also being uprooted and pushed over seems to be very relevant, and certainly lines up with what I was coming to as this eclipse was approaching, this lunar eclipse. The last time I had such a strong, very like almost lucid dream And when I say almost lucid, it's because I'm not aware that I'm dreaming, but the landscape is so vivid and real. Like I'm having physical sensations, like I see things in color, right? So it's not just like the dream where your brain is defragging, like there's something else clearly going on. The last time I had a dream like this on this property that was that lucid, there were tanks and military equipment going up my road. And then there were other things happening too that seemed wild and just like, how did that happen? But the tanks and the military equipment going up my road was something that happened the last time I dreamt this strongly and this lucidly on my property. So it was the same quality. It was and right out front of my house. So take that for what it's worth, especially how things have transpired over the last couple of days on the geopolitical stage, okay? But if you think about, where are we right now? We're at a Virgo full moon. Now, eclipses, right, are distortions of what normally would be these lunar transits that are a consistent turning over every month, right? And so they tend to be very personalized, the things that go on. They tend to bring out, the work that we're all doing within ourselves, right? Dealing with contention, opposition. Even today, when I was in acupuncture, the provider was talking about another patient of his and giving context for how he, works on things and the order of operations. And he was talking about two specific areas that one was treatable with acupuncture and the other side was treated with herbs. And they were diametrically opposed. And so were their treatments, but then you find this complementary way to treat them so that they, in fact, are working together. And so that's what we're dealing with all lunations. And a really good book, if you want to be kind of an astro nerd about things, a really good book about the lunation cycle is Dane Rudhyar's book called The Lunation Cycle. And it really lays out about how the solar lunar cycle, the lunation cycle, either in the natal chart or transiting, is really a framework for relationship and the relationship between the two seemingly opposite sides of ourselves represented by the sun and the moon. So we're dealing with that regularly. Now, when we have eclipses, it is way deeper than just the surface level personality that we are working with on a regular basis. When we have eclipses, we are crossing a threshold that is about the soul's evolution. And so the things that happen are deeply embedded, like in a time capsule, that then start to emerge over time throughout the course of the eclipse cycle, which is a 6-month cycle. So I've talked all about that in the Fire Horse reading or the transmission, and certainly if you've gotten your own personal forecast for the Fire Horse, then you are well aware of all of those dynamics. So I'm not going to belabor all of us by going back into it, other than to say when you have a lunar eclipse and especially a full lunar eclipse, the blood moon, the full blood worm moon, by the way. So I don't tend to get too attached to those titles, but I will say before I knew that it was a worm moon, and the reason it's a worm moon is because this is the time of year in the northern hemisphere in particular where because the snow is melting, it's getting into the soil, it's saturating the soil, and then the worms are forced to come up because they need to breathe, right? Because they are stuck under, they're in the soil and all of their channels are starting to fill with water. So the worms come up, right? And that's the same thing too when it rains really, really hard somewhere that you have a large worm population, right? They all come up because they're going to drown otherwise. So that's part of why this is a worm moon, because you're starting to see that thing happen with the worms. They're starting to come up because the ground is becoming saturated with all of the snow melting. So the worm moon. But before I even realized it was a worm moon, for about 2 days I kept waking up with the song. If you're into the band They Might Be Giants, then you know exactly where I'm going with this, and if not, it doesn't matter. Waking up with the song Dr. Worm in my head. Like as soon as I get up and it's just like running on repeat through my, through my meditation, I kind of have to like stick it over there in my head and be like, okay, well, you're clearly going to keep running on repeat, even though I'm trying to like I'm trying to calm all of that. So I thought that was really interesting. And it's so funny how, intuitive language works. Dr. Worm. Anyway, great song. Lyrics are worth looking at as well if you're not familiar with it. So, again, when you have an eclipse, though, it is distorted, right? You feel it. And in the case of the dream that I had, you experience something archetypal, you experience something subconsciously, you experience it deeply, intuitively, or in a feeling, but it's not highlighted like a normal eclipse. It's distorted. And in the case of a lunar eclipse, it's distorted by the full shadow of the earth, right? So all of the earthly things that we still are living through and dealing with and working with are all very much part of this equation, and they are casting a shadow on what otherwise would be a full illumination. So keep that in mind as well, that you may feel things and you may experience things subconsciously very powerfully like any other full moon, but the shadow that's cast on the full moon is a distortion. And it's something to keep in mind, again, that this is deeply embedded and will rise to the surface, just like those worms, later, right? As the cycle comes to an end, which is going to be July and August. In fact, it's going to be so close to the Lion's Gate when this cycle ends and the new one begins that I would be shocked that there wouldn't be something even more outrageous than what's going on right now. So, even something as massive as a huge oak tree, for instance, right? Because there's actually a massive oak tree on my property in the direction that would have been the tree that fell in my dream. It's huge. Even something that big is subject to other conditions to bring it down, right? Something that's ancient, something that is deeply embedded, right? A tree that is very, very tall is still subject to other natural forces, for instance, right? Whatever brought it down. And I don't know what brought it down. I can't really assume that it was natural or not because I wasn't there for it. What I do know is that it was right next to my house. It did no damage, but it was huge. And it was concerning because you're like, whoa, where did this come from? So even something that big, even that rooted. And Virgo is the functioning of our root system, right? In Virgo season, the roots are gathering the nutrients from the soil to feed the fruit. And what is the fruit? It is the casing for the seed. It is the gestating fetus, right? It is that which brings the next cycle to fruition eventually, right? And so Virgo time is where that's being fed from the root system. And this is where, now this eclipse was not necessarily a Draco eclipse, right? The degree of the eclipse itself is not in conjunction with Alpha Draconis, but you know what is? The south node of the moon is coming into alignment with Alpha Draconis. And the reason I bring that up is because this is where the Draco energy goes sideways, is when you are putting, there is a masterful sorcerer type of energy with Draco star seeds, right? You're talking about the serpent and the dragon, right? You're talking about very potent energy. You're talking about Kundalini in its most potent form, and what you can accomplish with that, what you can do, what you can manifest, the types of magic, quote unquote, that you can participate in at that level is very strong. And the Draco energy, the dragon energy, the serpent energy, it's not in itself is bad. It's when it becomes utilized to hoard the fruit for yourself, right? And to feed that fruit, not for the sake of the process of creation, but to hoard it, to hold it, to gather that power for the self. And I feel like that there needs to be, and this is the opposition of Virgo, which is Pisces, and we have Mars in Pisces now. We'll get to that. When I bring up the chart, we'll start going through the astrology. Right now, this is just much more of the symbolic and archetypal aspect of this eclipse, right? That even the most entrenched, even the most ancient of systems and beings and processes, right? Even they are subject to the process of uprooting them, right? Whatever it is. Even that huge oak tree is going to come down. And you better hope that it doesn't come down on your house, right? And it does seem like that, based on what I was experiencing, that in the dreamscape, it's that there's nothing to worry about, but there is a need to keep your head on a swivel a little bit, and to also realize that that tree, if it fell in the forest, for instance, it's not as if its whole purpose is gone. It's just repurposed at that point, right? That huge tree is going to be a place for other organisms to live. It's going to feed the soil, right? I mean, so in the moment, it can seem like a huge disruptive, destructive type of event. But in the long run, it is just the cycle of life going through the motions, right? And love is, for instance, love never dies. It's only repurposed for the greater good. So, but it can be, it can be very disruptive. It could cause a really loud stir. And it's also important to remember that even the most entrenched things, systems, structures are subject to falling as well. So you're going to have to take that and plug that into your own personal viewpoint of what's happening right now. So one thing I'm going to share, and this is barely a blip because it doesn't seem like at this moment it really, really matters to get too much into the space weather, but I am going to share the screen because this kind of interested me. And then we're going to look at the astrology of where we've been and where we are going over the next 2 weeks. So so this is Suspicious Observers, right? Their whole thing, this whole channel's purpose of existence is to educate people on the science of the magnetic pole shift, right? And the idea that the shifting of the poles is what is responsible for, global catastrophes and the turning over of lots of cycles, right? And that you have ice ages, you have the flood, the Noah flood, all of these things are related to a pole shift. Okay, that's the only focus of this channel. There is no real other explanation for things that are happening. So everything always comes back to the magnetic field is weakening in order for the pole shift. That's evidence that this is coming, right? That the axis of, the crust is going to shift position and the poles are going to shift position and everything's going to be in a different place. And this has happened many times before. So keep that in mind as well, because I thought it was interesting. So Schumann resonance and the pole shift, right? And so you can go to Suspicious Observers. This was on the 27th. This was right before, actually, everything happened with Iran. And I'm going to go into that too, astrologically, because there are some things that have already happened that I want to point out. I certainly want to give myself credit when I talked about the fact that I would be surprised if the U.S. wasn't embroiled in something with this eclipse window. And look at that. Imagine that. It's really not that difficult once you start to read the temporal map. So it's not like I knew exactly what was going to happen, but it was pretty obvious that something was going to transpire. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because the Schumann resonance, one thing I did notice, and maybe you've noticed it too, and I talked about it a couple videos ago as well, it's been doing weird stuff. weird stuff that doesn't seem to correspond to the solar activity. Now, things solar activity wise have really calmed down. We don't have any geomagnetic disturbances or storms right now. There was a day where there were no sunspots facing the Earth. It was blank. Things are starting to pick up a little bit now. There has been some seismic activity. So, I mean, but for the most part, it's pretty calm in terms of the sun and our response to it. Yet the Schumann was doing a lot of weird stuff. And this video actually from February 27th addressed that, because I was like, something is up. This is really, really weird. Like it's not corresponding to the usual patterns. And of course, this video was chalking it up to the reason the Schumann's being weird is because of the magnetic shield weakening. And I'm not disputing that. I think that that's probably mostly accurate. Now, I think there are other things going on as well that are related to the Schumann resonance that are not natural. And it's really hard to kind of tease out what's happening, what's not happening, which again is really important that you personally as an individual are very in tune with yourself and what things feel like when certain circumstances, certain conditions are present, right? So I just thought it would be interesting to share that. And if you wanted to look it up, you just go to Suspicious Observers or Space Weather News. Space Weather News is now the YouTube channel, and then it's on the 27th, and it says Schumann resonance and the pole shift. So anyway, I just wanted to share that because I thought it was interesting. So let's get into the astrology here of this full moon and the 2 weeks that are going to be taking us out of this eclipse window in general. So I do have the chart here for today, which is the 3rd, the 3-3, rather auspicious if you ask me that we have a lunar eclipse here. But I am actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it back a couple days because I really want to just give context here for what's been happening in terms of, in terms of the geopolitical stage, because I know that it's certainly has a lot of people feeling all kinds of things, thinking all kinds of things, saying all kinds of things. Everybody's got an opinion, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I'm just here to show you the temporal map about how things have transpired. So if you remember about, I don't even know if it was a week ago. No, not even. It's only been a couple days, right? Because February is a short month, of course. So what we had leading up to this past weekend were 2 main transits. One was actually 3, but 2 in particular that really grabbed my attention. So let me make sure here that you can see. And let's get this banner ad out of the way. Can you tell where I'm trying to get a flight to? We're going to Yellowstone in August as a family, so we're trying to get our flights out to Bozeman figured out because we're staying in Montana. Anyway, it's just. That's just what it is now. Anyway, so there are 2 transits that really stuck out to me in particular. One that was really related to the U.S. natal chart, and was something that I brought up in the Fire Horse reading as well, which was that Mars coming into the end degrees of Aquarius was going to come into a square with Uranus. Now, this square with Uranus from the position of the natal moon of the U.S. chart is something that has happened over and over. Mercury, Venus, and the Sun all passed over this point and were in a square to Uranus. Sometimes it was when Uranus was direct or retrograde, and in the case of Mars in particular, it's coming into, looks like the 26th into the 27th, coming into that square directly. It was while Uranus has been direct, okay, in conjunction with Algol. And we've talked about this many, many times, all right? The demon star, the head of the Gorgon, and what it represents, right? A beheading, right? And there's a strong military connection to that star as well. In fact, military honors as well. And but also bereavement is a big part of that star, because it represents ultimately, the story of Perseus taking the head of Medusa and what that allowed him to do, which was really to be able to defeat the Kraken, right, and rescue Andromeda. So this degree of Aquarius is where the natal moon of the US is. And Mars squaring Uranus is volatile no matter what. I mean, no matter how you shake it out. And the last time Mars was in a square to Uranus in this position was July 13th, 2024, right there. And that was when Mars was in Leo in a square to Uranus. Now it's on the opposite side in Aquarius, and it has much more of a collective energy that has the warrior energy behind it, right? The greater good, so to speak, with Aquarius, and certainly humanity as a whole, if we're going to talk about Aquarius, right? But it was right on top of the US natal moon. So you have this square happening, and then along with that, you have Mercury that has stationed retrograde at the same time. So, there was the volatility and just like that compulsion to do something, and a lot of drama and things kind of escalating and coming to a head was very present last week. And I continued to give the advice to people as things were reaching that critical point and people were kind of coming into battle mode for different reasons, right? Unless this is something that has already been in the works, I would not make any rash or hasty decisions with a Mercury retrograde with this type of volatile Mars-Uranus square, right? As on a personal note, right? But if you have been planning something, if you have negotiating something, if there is something in the works, this square might have been the perfect ignition point to really get that going, even with a Mercury retrograde, right? You might initiate something or take a step towards something, knowing that the Mars-Uranus square was going to be the trigger, maybe a bit of a tower moment, maybe more of just like a friction that forced the issue, knowing that then the Mercury retrograde was going to have a bit of a retreat. So maybe not definitive, right? Maybe not a definitive decision, but a step, an action taken, and then a time to review that action, or to maybe not pull back, but to step back and see how it all progresses during this Mercury retrograde. So it's not a surprise that things have transpired the way they have since the weekend, with this transit being so related to the U.S. natal chart in particular. The other thing about it is that the sun and the North Node, or Rahu, right, the North Node of the moon, were also in a conjunction. And so there was I think that strong identification with that part of us that really wants to put just rise to the occasion, right? Kind of like this self-quickening. And so there was a lot of that energy to charge forward and really be deeply invested and identified with it, and really give so much of ourselves to something more than ourselves, and something that we feel really passionate about. I would say the Mars in Aquarius was probably one of those few attributes during this time that was triggering the capacity, hopefully, of intelligent foresight, right? Yes, we want to act on these things. Yes, there are things being cut off. Yes, there is this huge tree falling, right? That symbolizes the falling of some sort of tower, right? And realizing that it represents, that it's representative of something, right? That maybe there is an element of our power that is being released. Or one thing I saw is just scanning social media from other spiritual influencers or whatever, just scanning is just like the purification process has begun. Great way to think about a full moon in Virgo, but also keep in mind, again, it's an eclipse. And so it's going to be something that is so deeply purifying that it may not even be fully understood or finished until we get into August, right? But the process is very much here, and we all felt it. So it might take a while to get that tree off the property. You know what I mean? It might take a while to get it like processed and cut up and stuff like that. And in fact, that's so interesting because that degree of Mars squaring Uranus, 28 degrees Aquarius, is a tree that's been felled and sawed to provide firewood, right? So you have this huge upheaval, right? This huge tree falling, for instance, and it's going to take some time to like process it and cut it up. But you might see an opportunity like, oh, look at that. That's actually going to provide something in the future that is really needed. So it may seem like, oh my God, we're at the precipice of doom here, but maybe, it's worth going back to that Mars square Uranus and be like, there's something that maybe was released or given up, right? There's that Uranus aspect, but also, is there some intelligent foresight about what to do with it? That's something you're going to have to answer for yourself and really reflect on. But I'm just bringing your awareness to this particular transit that really kicked off what is now happening at a geopolitical level. Certainly internationally. And, the U.S. is completely involved and embroiled in it and is, in fact, probably one of the main proponents of it. But it's something that is going to ripple out into the whole collective. And I would say too, to really track Mercury in its retrograde, because it's really we're not gonna get the full scope of this until I think Mercury comes out of its shadow. So we have like 3 weeks of the retrograde and then another 3 weeks coming back out of shadow. So 6 weeks or so. And what's today? It's early March, so mid-April. Things might start to mentally look a little different. We might have a whole different mentality about what's happening right now in about 6 weeks. So, and I've heard other strictly political commentators and things like that. And it's interesting, same timeline actually, that's not even remotely astrologically based. And so I'm like, okay, yeah, watch the Mercury retrograde through Pisces. Now Mars is in Pisces. So, I mean, there are two ways to really consider this. First, let me get the chart back to today, which is the 3rd, so we can look at what we're doing moving forward, right? And for the most part, I mean, the big transits going on this next 2 weeks is one that us Sag people have been waiting for a long time, which is Jupiter stationing direct. That's going to be happening in a week, right? Right around the time that we're going to get our, what are we going to get? Our third quarter moon. Okay, but we'll get there. So Jupiter's going to station direct, right, in Cancer, which is a place that it's very powerful in, right? So a lot of that inner expansion and that internal root system is back to expanding outward, right? And the US natal chart is very Cancer heavy. Very Cancer heavy. So, and is a Sag rising. The U.S. natal chart is a Sag rising. For you Sag rising people, and anybody who's got strong Sag, you're really going to feel it. But especially you Sag rising people, I mean, personality wise, it's like things are going to turn back on. So, that's a big one. And then the other transits that are going to be happening for the most part are actually really favorable. I mean, Venus is going to move into Aries, so that's not awesome because she's not at her best there. She'd rather be in Libra. So she's going to meet Neptune, she's going to meet Saturn, both in Aries. So that's going to make the things that have solidified in terms of new potentiality starting to rise from the depths. It's going to make it very visceral, very palpable, something that we value, connected to security, safety, comfort, all those Venus things. But when she's in Aries, she's kind of just like, bitch, it is all about me, right? Princess of Wands energy, that it's all about me, and that is what she's going to act on. And sometimes she just burns it all down in the process because there's really nothing else other than I'm acting on my own ego right now. So that's something to keep in mind. So at least Saturn will be very grounding and maturing Neptune, it'll be a little different. It just kind of depends on how you're working with this energy. So that's going to be happening. Jupiter's going to station direct. But Mercury and the Sun are going to be conjunct, and they're both going to trine Jupiter. So those are very, in my opinion, the water trines in particular, they're going to be very stabilizing, but only in a way, I think, where you have to find that quietness, that silence within yourself in order to really receive the inspiration you're looking for. Continuing to try to find answers outside of ourselves is progressively becoming something that is not working, basically. It's less potent as time goes on. And so those trines, when we look at them, just keep that in mind, that those stabilizing forces are going to be very grounding emotionally and spiritually as well. When we talk about water signs, they'll be very grounding emotionally and spiritually about not only what we think, but what we understand, which is what Jupiter represents, right? And yes, there's a lot of good fortune. There is a lot of beneficence when it comes to Jupiter, especially stationing direct in a sign that it's happy in and it's powerful. The only thing about that is that the Mercury aspect will be retrograde. So there'll still be a little bit of, consideration, introspection about these things. So, but ultimately, I feel like we just got this huge reveal with this lunar eclipse that is a reveal within ourselves, something that's not openly obvious. And when it will be, again, August into September is Virgo season. So things will be a lot more clear around these types of whatever's going on for you Virgo wise. Where is it at in your chart? What do you have that's in Virgo? And then certainly at the collective level, it's going to be a lot more transparent and on the surface and has fulfilled itself come July into August. So here we are on the 3rd. And something else that really drew my attention about this chart is that Black Moon Lilith, the true or oscillating Lilith, is at these last degrees of Sagittarius. So it's in a trine to Chiron as well. And earlier, before the moon came into Virgo, while it was in Leo, there was this grand fire trine. And Lilith, Lilith is that power within ourselves that if we can keep that space in order for divine inspiration to come forward, that primal sense of power is a huge asset. But it's when we try to fill that void ourselves by disempowering other people, by bypassing, by overcompensating, all of those things. And in a trine to Chiron, it really depends on how you're dealing with your own wounds of self and self-worth and your inner child, all these Aries themes about, the ego and identity. If Chiron is really just mowing you over right now and really just tugging on you and poking those vulnerable spots and you're not getting anything out of it, then this trine to Lilith in Sagittarius is going to stabilize those primal things, actions that are really going to end up just hurting you more in the long run. So, but if you are being honest with yourself, if you are able to recognize those wounds coming to the surface when you've been triggered and you're like, whoa, look at what I can learn about myself and how I interact with other people. Wow, look at how that situation triggered that wound in me. This Lilith in Sagittarius, so much understanding that we can act on as a result is really, really powerful. So that really stood out to me in terms of just right now and moving forward, that Lilith is going to be in Sagittarius. So what else do we have for this full moon? So the degree itself of the full moon, let's go back just a couple hours here so we can see it exactly, which is the degree itself is 12 to 13 degrees Virgo, 12 to 13 degrees of Pisces. 12 to 13 degrees Virgo is an interesting, it's about power, straight up. It's about personal power. And the degree, the Sabian symbol, is a powerful statesman overcomes the state of political hysteria. Interesting. So keep in mind, again, that this is going to be something that transpires and comes to the surface over the course of the next 6 months. So right now, it's maybe hard or difficult to see how anybody's overcoming a state of political hysteria. And in fact, it kind of seems like they're poking the bear, right? Or causing a state of political hysteria. And it's about power. But remember, this is a south node eclipse. What does that mean? It means that the south node or the descending node is where the full moon is happening. This is where the moon is at the time of the exact opposition to the sun. And so the south node is where we're coming out of. It is what we've mastered. And in some ways, this is showing, like, look at the power that has been generated at the soul level, something we've mastered, right? The focusing of the collective need for order and structural interdependence into something that answers this need. Imagine a huge lumbering tree that is, in fact, the focus of the need for an ecosystem to be ordered and structurally interdependent, right? Like, that is a possibility. But just like that tree, any of these systems eventually come under the weight of themselves, and certain circumstances will push them over or drive them to be uprooted, for instance. And what's 13 degrees of Pisces? This is where the sun is at the full moon. An ancient sword used in many battles is displayed in a museum. It is an example of what has been. Now, this is where the sun is. This is where Mercury is going to retrograde back to. This is about being an example and the personal power, not from our own conviction necessarily, although that's important, and that is where we're coming out of. That is the momentum pushing us forward at a soul level. But this is about personal power in living common ideals. And that's where the sun is really representing and sustaining all of us with this, right? But we can't forget where we've come from. And this is what these South Node eclipses represent, where we've been and what we need to let go of, which is why I think the idea of purification at a collective level is very apt at this point for this eclipse, right? And sometimes that purification doesn't necessarily look like that on the surface. It looks like a huge structure or tower coming down and causing a lot of fear and damage. But there is something to be gained from that, that forwards the cycle, right? Just like I talked about with the tree that's been felled and sawed up and has a stacked woodshed for when those resources are needed, right? So maybe you didn't plan on that, but now it's here. And what are you going to do with it? So those are the degrees of the eclipse itself. Now, when we get to the 3rd and 4th, the 4th and the 5th, excuse me, there are more big transits happening. So Venus is going to sextile Uranus, right? So we know that the eclipse, or Mars was in a square to Uranus. Now Venus in these late degrees of Pisces, which is where everything is going to end up, right? So Mercury eventually, and the sun and Mars, they're all going to come into this position and sextile or have a 60-degree angle with Uranus, which is a very, very productive type of flash of insight, sudden breakthrough type of energy. And it's harmonious. And it's also exciting, right? Especially with Venus in Pisces, right? And so just because there's been something toxic released, just because there is a natural cycle that has turned over that Uranus is representing, does not mean that everything we need isn't right here in front of us. So when Venus and Uranus are in a sextile, it's promoting a very harmonious balance, strangely enough, where you can honor your need for deep emotional connection, which is Venus in Pisces, right? With your desire for independence and change. So this could be something in your, personal life. Again, it just depends on where you find Pisces in your chart, especially if you're like a Pisces person, right? Sun, moon, and rising, having Venus move through your sign like this, and then to sextile Uranus, you're gonna really feel this in terms of who you are. But again, there's unconventional and sudden change with Uranus and Taurus like this, but it does encourage something refreshing, an unconventional approach to this, and it favors creative freedom, something spontaneous, over traditional structures. Ooh, I'm just getting all kinds of feels right now about this. So, and it's a time to explore these unique and inspiring connections, right? So yes, those traditional structures have come falling and tumbling down, but this sextile right after this happens is like, hey, everything you need is right in front of you, because Spirit provides everything that we all need all the time. It's like a fertile garden under the full moon. Yes, and we just had a full moon, did we not? Granted, it was a lunar eclipse, but it's still a full moon. So we might not have full awareness of it, but so that's where the trust comes in. And with Venus, we have to feel it in our bodies, right? We have to feel it in our relationships, feel it in the materials and the systems of comfort and security that surround us, right? So we may not necessarily have total evidence right this moment of this, but this is an opportunity to make the most of these unexpected changes, right? And we have to feel into it with Venus and Pisces, okay? So that's coming right after on the 4th, March 4th, of course. And then right after that, we have another really very pleasant and very stabilizing transit on the 5th of March, which is the Sun in a trine to Jupiter. Now, whenever these two come into a relationship with each other, that is either even a conjunction, which are not always the best, right? Because they're so activating. But even a conjunction with the Sun and Jupiter is usually very favorable. These two coming into a trine. Now keep in mind that Jupiter is still very much in its retrograde, but it is slowing down, and it is coming to basically a standstill at 1516 Cancer. 1516 Pisces is the Sabian symbol is in the quiet of his study, a creative individual experiences a flow of inspiration. Now, Jupiter in Cancer, when you come from the first half of Cancer into the second half, it is a process of personality integration into something more than yourself, right? It is when the root system is now established in the soil and starts to form a relationship with the medium, right? And that's what 16 degrees Cancer. It's that turnover, right? Now we've lowered the old flag, we've raised the new flag. The first half of Cancer is all about that process. The second half is the concern with the problems raised by the process of personality integration, right? You start to feel out like what it's like to integrate your ego and personality and your consciousness into something more than yourself, and this is what the family dynamic is really about. So personal control, organization of self for the purposes of each special situation, personal control. So this trine between these two is this is a very profound emotional healing moment or spiritual growth moment, this trine, okay? It encourages looking inward, to revise, to cultivate home and family, to integrate your personal development goals rather than pushing for new outer world achievements. Now remember, Mercury is retrograde now. This is the perfect time to really be actually doing this work right now, to look inward, to make those revisions, to integrate everything that's happened so far into where you are right now, I guess I could say. So there is a potential for some very deep inner transformation with this trine, with this Sun Jupiter trine. And it's not going to just be a one-off, because from here, Mercury, there'll be a Mercury cazimi, right? Mercury and the Sun will be conjunct, and then Mercury will trine Jupiter as well, and we'll get there. So Venus moves into Aries right after this, and like I said, she's kind of like she's got that Princess of Wands vibe in the Thoth deck, where she just burns it all down and she's blazing through. And it's not all bad, right? It's just she doesn't even have the wherewithal or the ability to look behind her, right? And she's like, I'm just charging through. Remember, Aries is the ram. Why are they called the ram? Because they ram their heads into each other, into whatever, male sheep, right? And so they're ruled by Mars, right? It's just out the gate, instinct, right? Bold, courageous, forward momentum, cardinal fire. So Venus moving into this sign, which, she wants to be in its opposite sign, which is Libra, which, by the way, is where the moon will be when this happens. It's a little bit, you know what I mean? It's just going to be all this, lusty and really dynamic energy, but it's based on how she feels, how we feel, not emotionally how we feel, but our gut and how we want to create. Venus definitely rules those creative pursuits and art and beauty, right? So the Princess of Wands, this is a really great archetype to focus on while Venus is in Aries. And I'm really grateful that she's going to meet Saturn early on, because it's going to be one of those grounding influences. Just like, okay, be a little bit more mature about this so you don't burn everything down in the process. So Venus moves into Aries on, what does it look like? The 6th. All right. And then it's the 7th, where Mercury and the Sun come into their conjunction, their cazimi, right? And that's always a moment of just like mental energy really being illuminated. So light bulbs going off, people are talking. Now Mercury's in its retrograde, so it might not be a lot of outward discussion. It may be an internalized experience. It might be more private discussions. It may be something that you're having a conversation with spirit about, but you'll still be infused and sustained by it with the Sun in Pisces like this. So that, and 16 degrees of Pisces, which is where this conjunction is happening, is an Easter parade, right? It's the participation in a collective peak experience. So these two coming together merges conscious intent, right? So that's the Sun in Pisces, with subconscious intuitive thought. There's your Mercury retrograde in Pisces, creating a period for another period of deep internal reflection, of dream work, reconsidering past emotional or creative projects, right? We're talking about this Pisces energy. It's not just your feelings. There is inspiration from the muse that comes in through Pisces. Pisces people tend to be incredible artists, and very creative, because they are, basically just dissolved into the formlessness of creative potential. So this alignment is an inferior conjunction, and it acts as a cosmic reset. Okay, so you're already seeing here that from this full moon lunar eclipse, we have multiple moments here, transits, in fact, that support this deep internal reflection, reconsidering past things, emotional things, a cosmic reset, highlighting miscommunications, but encouraging spiritual insights, right? This is a period best used for what? Slowing down, reviewing, and trusting the flow of events, rather than pushing for certainty or control. And I know that we all, everybody wants that to some degree, okay? Everybody wants that certainty or control to a degree. And this astrology of this 2 weeks coming out of this full moon and really winding down the active eclipse window is about this cosmic reset and taking advantage of the intent to have that deep internal reflection, right? Very spiritual, very deep, very emotional as well. Now, at the same time, speaking of Lilith, as you can see, this whole thing is in a square to Black Moon Lilith over in Sagittarius. Now, this is a mutable square, thankfully, so there'll be this sense, I can already feel it in my whole body right now, that this square, Lilith, this compulsion, this primal urge to experience an emotional rebirth is going to be so strong, and it's going to square this conjunction, this cazimi that is asking us, that is providing us an opportunity for that deep internal reflection. It doesn't mean that emotional rebirth can't be experienced, but if we try to push that within ourselves, again, this is where Lilith goes sideways and we lose that power or empowerment of Lilith, and then just, give into more of the overpowering aspect of Lilith, right? All of the dark side of Lilith. So that right then and there, again, is just reinforcing, to me at least, the need to reflect, to go into those past emotional things and subconscious intuitive thought. Okay. Now, the same time, speaking of which, Venus and Neptune will be conjunct at 2 degrees Aries. Oh, 2 degrees Aries, one of my favorite degrees, because it's one of the hardest ones, right? A comedian that reveals human nature. The whole trickster energy keeps coming back around, or the Heyoka energy, or the jester. A lot of people getting jokers in their personal and the Catalyst membership readings as well. That joker keeps coming up. The comedian that reveals human nature, the jester that is able to tell it like it is, right? I think stand-up comedy, personally, is one of the most difficult creative art forms and performance arts, because that's what you're doing. You're basically telling it like it is through the medium of humor. It disarms people, but it also puts up that mirror. So Venus and Neptune in conjunction at this degree blends the romantic idealism of Neptune with impulsive action, and it creates a very passionate and dreamlike atmosphere. So it's not like we can't get something out of this mirrored objective projection, right? The comedian revealing the human nature. So it does, this will trigger something intense, maybe idealistic, and maybe unrealistic, especially when we're going to talk about Neptune here. And Venus, having her desires be on fire with Aries is also part of this too. So, it's important to have heightened sensitivity. There's nothing wrong with being creatively inspired, but there's also the pitfall of seeing what you want to see in this situation. So sometimes especially where it is in Aries, this combination brings a sense of, is the person you're crushing on everything you imagine them to be, or are you projecting your own visions and ideals onto them? Well, the fact that it's at this degree of Aries, I would say, is going to project your projection back onto you. Does that make sense? Like, if you are projecting your own visions and ideals onto someone, this is an example, then if you are doing that, then it's going to be mirrored right back at you. And that's not going to be very comfortable if you are not really, dealing with your Chiron wounding. It's just going to trigger you and you'll go into victim mode. And that is a huge problem right now. I mean, my gosh, I can't even tell you, just, working with the public and being, in the healing arts, for instance, regardless if it's a client or, people that I'm around. I mean, the victim mentality is rampant. And it's just getting, all Chiron and Aries in particular, it's just been really strong. So this is a time for embracing the serendipity in every experience while staying grounded, right? So you may find yourself having your projections mirrored back at you right away. But the other side of this is to be inspired, right? To be inspired by that, to be like, whoa, I never saw it that way before. And it bounced back at you. But at the same time, you're like, whoa, this is a huge breakthrough moment. Again, embrace the serendipity in every experience, but stay grounded. Don't get pulled into the idealism of the whole thing, but stay grounded. This is a really good transit. So you have that along with a Mercury Cazimi at the same time, right? At the same time, on the same day, basically, as the moon is in Scorpio, by the way, that is in a trine to Mars in Pisces. Oh, good old Mars. We're going to talk more about that as we go through, because there'll be some particular transits. Now, Venus is going to then come into conjunction with Saturn. So talk about, I don't want to say a wet blanket, but it's like a a fire blanket, if you're familiar with that, right? Saturn's going to come in and bring a very serious, maturing energy to everything that Venus represents, right? So relationships and finances and personal desires. It forces a reckoning with responsibility, requiring you to stabilize impulsive desires, commit to long-term structures, and handle potential delays or coldness in love with mature, proactive nature. So it's combining the fiery, impulsive nature of Aries for both of them, and they are both weak in this sign. I want you to please consider that. Saturn and Venus want to be in Libra. Okay, so when they're both in Aries, they're both weak. So they both tend to overcompensate, and now they're together, right? So you have this impulsive, fiery nature of Aries and with a restrictive, disciplined nature of Saturn. So it's asking for responsible, mature action in all of these areas. Now, the other side of it is that it could go so serious and so restricting as a means to overcompensate that it could... you could like basically stamp out your own fire, right? The fire blanket. So it really depends on that fire, right? Some people, and if you participate or you're familiar with any type of like fire dancing, for instance, anybody that does like fire poi or fire staff, any of those arts or performance arts where you have some sort of, thing, right? Whether it's a staff, whether it's a hoop, whether it's a fan, whatever it is that's on fire, you always have a fire blanket nearby because if something goes bad, you got to put it out. This could certainly be that, but you could also see that somebody could jump the gun here and think that you're on fire when it's all on purpose. So you just got to be aware of the potentials here. But the best case scenario is that this conjunction brings a very serious and maturing energy to all of these Venusian things that could otherwise you just like burn them down. It's just like, hey, I'm going to try fire dancing for the first time. And then you light yourself on fire, or you light the whole, you know what I mean? You light the whole neighborhood on fire, right? And then Saturn's got to come in and tamp it out. That could be one way this could go about. But I would say that mature, proactive action is your best case scenario. And I, for one, am very grateful that this transit is happening, because I also feel like it's going to be a wake-up call of like, okay, where do you want to align yourself? You and I, each of us, we align ourselves with that which we are part of, right? And so maybe we have to commit to those long-term structures in order to, participate in the greater experience. And this type of transit is going to make it like a reality check. So that's that. So the 9th is next Monday, and this is where Mercury and Jupiter come into their trine as well. And like I said, it's another stabilizing type of energy emotionally and spiritually, but also the same thing with the sun, right? It's going to be, whereas we kind of identified ourselves with it, with the sun in Pisces, Mercury in this retrograde is going to be like the actual mechanism of intuitive thought, subconscious thought, dream work, astral work, right? In terms of personality integration. And these two are both retrograde. So that's going to be even deeper and more retrospective and more internalized when these two are in a trine. It's going to be very, I just don't see it being very quiet. Or I mean, I do see it very quiet. It's not going to be very open. It's not going to be something that is, okay, let's make plans now. We can like implement plans and have these long-term plans. For instance, like this is the type of transit, if they were both direct, that you would start planning a like a foreign travel type of situation or whatever. These are both retrograde. So maybe it's more about committing to something or committing to the idea of it, and not necessarily making those plans yet, but being willing to feel into all of the ins and outs of that situation. For instance, I just don't see it being very outward at this point. And again, another instance of this deep, reflective type of situation here for each of us. And then at the same time, you have the moon opposite Uranus. The moon conjunct the Heyoka, right? The jester, these late degrees of Scorpio. So just also, while that is stabilizing things, there's also going to be this kind of emotional upheaval, again, with the moon opposite Uranus at this time. So there'll be lots to deeply consider and to understand at this time. And then this is where Jupiter stations on the 10th of March. Jupiter stations and Venus comes into a sextile with Pluto, right? And there's this sense of really being able to transcend the self with the power of what has come before, right? The Pluto in this degree of Aquarius. And at the same time, Jupiter stations direct. So I do feel like that once we get to this point, Venus sextile Pluto, Jupiter stations direct. This is on the 10th. We have our third quarter moon on the 11th. And then Mars comes into the picture the 13th, 14th, 15th into the end of the lunar cycle. Then Mars is going to get involved. And when Mars is in Pisces, the martyrdom complex is really strong. Spiritual crusade. I don't even want to say the word that type of thing is related to a specific religion, but I think you're probably picking up what I'm putting down here on YouTube, at least. Mars and Pisces, right? Just spiritual crusade. That's all I'm going to say. That can be a very big part of it. And when you have Mars, that's going to be in conjunction with the North Node. And for all the wonderful things that the North Node and the head of our soul represents, it is compulsive. It is driven. It is so deep, you don't even know that you're being driven by it. So that's something to keep in mind as we come into the last quarter of this whole lunar cycle, and this whole eclipse window is at the end as we're coming into the disseminating and balsamic moon, which is where Mars reaches the North Node. Mars also comes into alignment with Mercury. Well, let's move forward here because we're looking here at the 13th, 14th, and 15th, right? And, Lilith is going to be in a T-square with the nodes, so she's coming back into this conversation. She's part of this conversation this whole time because it's all mutable energy with Pisces and Virgo, and she's up here in Sag. So Mars conjunct Rahu, or the North Node, Mars conjunct Mercury, and let's see what degree that's happening at. I think we're going to see here that it's going to be roughly 10 to 11 degrees. So Mars is just coming off the North Node. It's going to meet a retrograde Mercury, which is really going to inflame a lot of the thoughts. Oh boy. This is going to be dicey, I think, in my opinion, in terms of out there, right? Out there, it's going to be dicey. And then Mercury, again, is going to meet the North Node as well. And then it's going to station direct soon after. Not quite at the new moon, which is going to be in the last degrees of Pisces, but soon after, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's going to be right around the equinox. Yeah, it's actually going to be on the equinox that Mercury stations direct, right on top of the North Node or the ascending node. So yeah, you can see at this point, all this stuff has moved into Aries by the time we get to the 20th and 21st. And Mars will actually be at the point of the lunar eclipse by this time as well. And so what is something that is illuminating that which is deeply embedded in each of us with this lunar eclipse, Mars is going to be acting on that come the 20th and the 21st. So I do anticipate things will start picking up more. So please, if I could give you any advice during this time, see, it was not a quick transmission after all. I just looked at the time and we're over an hour. So I would say, I'm going to take away the chart now. I would say, please take advantage of this time to do your own reflection, do your dream work, do your subconscious work, do your dream and spiritual journaling, whatever it is. Like, really take the initiative to go deep and to be still and quiet and let the conversation with spirit happen, because soon we're going to be acting. Right? There's going to be action, especially when Mars comes into Aries, right? right now, Mars coming into Pisces, you know, that personalized action, that fiery, impulsive nature is absolutely enhanced and motivated by some sort of spiritual crusade. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. It just depends on, you know, whose voice of God you're listening to or what's coming through. So I think it's going to get a little dicey around the 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, you know, leading into the last week and into the next new moon and then the vernal equinox, right? And when Mars comes into Aries, oh boy, we'll talk about that later. So here's the takeaway. Really reflect on everything that's happened. Really reflect on your own personal power. And do you feel less empowered when those cycles turn over, when those huge structures come tumbling down that are never promised to be there forever, right? That's the thing. Like every tree is subject to falling over depending on how that happens. What are you going to do with it? That's the real question. And right now with the Mercury retrograde and all of these Jupiter retrograde and the connections to both of them throughout the next 2 weeks, this is the perfect time to really reflect and to do that introspective work and really consider everything that has happened so far, you know, the intentions that have been set for this eclipse cycle. Know that right now is a purification process that is so deep that it's probably very difficult to even conceptualize how it will come to fruition down the road, but it's here now. So this is the time to really engage that conversation with spirit, with creator, with God, and certainly your higher self in order to be inspired with how you're going to move forward in the weeks and months ahead. So, my friends, thank you so much for being here. I really just appreciate all of you so very much. Catalyst membership, you'll be getting your energy reading sometime this weekend, and then we will, in fact, resume personal readings. If you are interested in intuitive readings twice a month as a supplement to these transmissions, if you want your own personal reading to also go along with that, every month, every 6 weeks, you may want to consider Catalyst membership. It really does support not only me to do this work, but you know all of the business expenses that go along with having a digital platform and what that costs to maintain. So if you want to, I was going to say, if you want to get a personal reading, you can do that. Everything is on my website, and there is a list of services. It's readings and energy work. Of course, if you are local and you're interested in hands-on body work or energy work, that's an option, and you can get a hold of me if you haven't already. And when I say local, I mean local to Pennsylvania, Lycoming County. I don't think people are going to travel that far, but if you are interested, that is an option as well. And yeah, exciting things coming down the road. But right now is a time to really reflect and do some deep inner work and come to terms with the aspects that are purifying out of our system and where we're going from here. So take care of yourself, take care of your nervous system, definitely take care of each other the best you can. And I'll see you guys on the next video. Bye.